Let's talk about the fact that Donald Trump came into office and spent almost the entire first year of his term trying to get rid of the Affordable Care Act. We all fought against it, and then the late, great John McCain, at that moment at about 2 o'clock in the morning, killed his attempt to take health care from millions of people in this country. But let's focus on the end goal. If we don't get Donald Trump out of office, he's going to get rid of all of it.
Chris Matthews with Kamala Harris in Houston. Chris?
We've got her, Senator Kamala Harris. You did set the keynote tonight, I thought, with your directing of it, the focus of the night morally on Trump.
Yeah, well, that is what the
Why did you decide to do that, to say, instead of debating your opponents about who's got this, who's got that, to say, no, Trump's the bad guy?
Because he is. And that's why I'm in the race. And that's why everyone on the stage, I believe, is in the race. There is so much that has yet in this campaign to be explored, to discussed, analyzed, and really articulated about just all of the details of the failures of the Trump administration. There's so much there, Chris. And, you know, part of the frustration that I hear when I'm out on the road, be it in Iowa or Nevada or California or Michigan, is that people know that there is so much wrong that is happening with this administration, from, you know, what just happened recently in terms of deregulation of chemical and fossil fuel industries and what that relates to pollution. That is not being discussed. And I hope to help encourage us to have that conversation. The American people have a right to know, and we, to be responsible in this campaign, I think must discuss what is wrong with the status quo, which is why we are asking for change.
I liked it so much. A couple of things you said. We're a trading state, California. We believe in trade. But when you said how the sky has changed in Los Angeles, because I used to write about this. I was writing about it 20 years ago, going into Los Angeles, and this sort of Martian atmosphere. It was yellowish. It was where you said brown. It was not a sky. And I said, even these rich Hollywood stars, they go out in front of sit in their swimming pools and they're looking up at this crap in the sky. And you said, we the American people got rid of that.
That's right. And this is why I have so much optimism, to be honest with you. We have to be honest. We have to be truthful. We have to be clear-eyed about what's wrong. But there is so much in terms of good reason to know what we are capable of achieving. And for me, this election is about, you know, the obvious point that we need to not have another 4 years of Donald Trump. We need to turn the page. But so much of this campaign for me and the election is about then writing the next chapter of our country based on an America we believe in, an America where we do have blue skies, an America where we're not worried about our children going to school and enduring a drill when they learn about how to hide in a closet because of a mass shooter. There is so much work that is achievable. And that's how I think about the task before us, but I do it with a sense of optimism. Clear-eyed with the problems, but optimistic about what we're capable of.
Some things amaze me. I'm surprised that you haven't gone up. You went very up. That's not good English. You went up quickly after you went after Biden in the first debate. Then you settled back. You didn't go after him in the second. You didn't go after this one. I think your performance tonight is going to be much more positive, but you still took a question from one of the moderators about, basically, it seemed to be a shot of, why aren't you getting support among the black community? That seemed to be the essence of it. They're saying you were too much the prosecutor in California. And you came back with that with a lot of facts.
Yeah.
Is that going to work, a factual argument against that resistance from the black community?
Well, the black community, like every community, wants to hear the facts. And I have a responsibility to certainly clear the record, especially when there are distortions. But
have you gotten a bad press on that?
Look, I'm running for president. It's not going to be given to me. I got to earn it, and I'm going to have to take the hits.
But you're the only African American in the top 4 or 5.
Yeah.
And so you should be doing better.
I'm still introducing myself to the American people. You want to talk about...
I'm urging you to be better. I'm not knocking you, but I'm trying to figure out why it's not happening.
But Chris, look, those of us who are in the top tier have been, 2 of them run for president before, one many times. The others have been on the national scene for quite some time. So if you want to believe the polls, though, you should also know that the polls have been very clear that on a head-to-head match, I win against Donald Trump. by a significant margin. So, but listen, this is an election, and this is the beauty of our democracy. You have to earn it. You have to earn it. You have to travel.
Can you break through in South Carolina? Is that it?
I intend to break through in every state of this nation. I intend to compete. I intend to earn the vote of people. It will not be given. They're going to have to know about my plans as well as my record, and that's why I am working as hard as possible to cover as much ground and let the American people know that, honestly, and this is where I think it's so critically important, that I intend not only to be a leader that is going to accomplish great things in terms of the challenges that face us, but I intend to be a leader who unifies our country. And I can't stress that enough. You know, I started tonight's debate talking about this. This guy has been sowing hate and division among us, and I travel our country, and regardless of where people live, and even regardless of the party with which they're registered to vote, they want to know that we can unify around our common goals, our common problems, and our common hopes.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.